HumanFIRST laboratory in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, a research scholar at the Center for Transportation Studies, and an adjunct assistant professor in Industrial and Systems Engineering in the Department of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Morris's research focuses on driver behavior and human-computer systems interactions with respect to a wide range of roadway safety topics. Her research has focused on crash data documentation, infrastructure evaluations of rural through-stop intersections, and vehicle messaging systems, and evaluating education and engineering efforts related to pedestrian safety. Dr. Morris received a PhD in human factors psychology from Wichita State University in 2011. Please welcome Dr. Nichole Morris.
All right, thank you for inviting me to talk about this study today. I have kids in daycare, so this is that time of year when I start getting sick, so hopefully my voice holds. But this is a really cool project, and one of the big reasons is it's a great demonstration of how taking the many E's that we apply to traffic safety, putting them together, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so it's very hard to change culture. It's very hard to change driver behavior on a large scale by trying to pull any of these individual levers. So trying to pull engineering or education or enforcement. But if you put them together, then you can see this really unified effect that would be greater than trying any of these things separately. One of the big reasons why we took on this project was because, as you may have heard nationally, pedestrian fatal crashes are at a 25-year high. I've heard 28-year high, depending on which you're looking at. So we're seeing this really big problem that we're losing more and more pedestrians every year. And if we think about this in terms of numbers that are easier to sort of process, so every 1.5 hours in the a pedestrian is killed. Just really, really scary. And then to match that in St. Paul, every other day a pedestrian is hit. So this is a lot of pedestrians being killed and hit. And right about the time that this project was sort of emerging, we had seen a spike of pedestrian deaths in St. Paul. I think we'd had 6 pedestrian deaths that year. And so really trying to think innovatively about what can we do to address this problem. And at the same time, the city of St. Paul was starting to do something pretty innovative that wasn't being done in a lot of other cities, which is the Stop For Me campaign. And so this is pairing high visibility enforcement with education, where the police are out sort of doing these sting operations, crossing crosswalks, and using these criterion to see should the driver have stopped by law, and if they don't, then the police pull them over in this high visibility enforcement. So it sort of feels like police are out everywhere, and it's really important to educate and show why people are being pulled over. So then you have this kind of slew of community members go across the street with a banner and kind of highlight, this is what we're doing, these are why these people are pulled over. Thank you for stopping, please do it again, kind of a thing. So you have a lot of community members kind of getting involved and trying to raise awareness that this is a big problem we should really value and take care of our pedestrians. So the state was looking at this and going, we should try to measure, is this effective? Because one of the hard things about high visibility enforcement is drivers will kind of get in line while the police are out. And the moment that high visibility enforcement operation ends, then it's sort of like the cat's away, the mice will play, and they go right back to their normal behavior. So is there any long-term impact, or are we just sort of doing feel-good measures, which sometimes we do, in traffic safety, or are we actually achieving what we're hoping to achieve, which is result in long-term positive change? So I was really lucky that I'm a part of the Roadway Safety Institute, which is a Region 5 institute, which includes Michigan. And at Western Michigan University, there's a researcher there named Dr. Ron Van Houten, and he's an expert in this field. He's been doing this work since the 80s, multiple countries, states, cities. and has successfully shown that by employing this very specific program, you can improve driver yielding, change the culture of a community. And he did this in Gainesville, Florida, where he did the program, and he came back 4 years later to measure what had happened, and yielding actually improved since they last checked. It was really powerful, really exciting study. And so Ron sort of said, I'll work with you on this project. We can do this together, and I'll show you the ropes on how to run a study like this. And so I, of course, said yes. So how do we measure yielding? Now, the safer way for me and my staff would have been to put cameras all over St. Paul and measure how much drivers yield to pedestrians. That's really problematic because normal, what we call natural pedestrians in the study, which is a really scientific way of saying pedestrians, I guess. But when they cross the street, they're not going to cross like scientists, which is a problem for my study. You know, what some pedestrians will do is they'll stand at the crosswalk, but they'll be still in the curb, right? And by law, you have to be standing into the street. Some drivers will stop for you because the intention is clear, you want to cross, but by law, you have to be stepping into the street. So that's not really a good measure that the driver didn't comply with the law because there was no yield for them to take. Other times, pedestrians, they'd be crazy to want to cross some of these streets. So they're not going to step into the street. They're going to hang back and wait for a gap and go. Well, now I didn't even have anything to code because they weren't contending with traffic. So it wouldn't take an incredible amount of coding and video all over the city to capture this data. And then the other thing is sometimes they will step into the road and then they force the yield, which you've seen this before, I'm sure. It's a great way to get a driver to stop, assuming they're paying attention, is you just step in front of them. And drivers don't want to hit pedestrians. So I think that's a pretty solid fact, but they don't necessarily always see you. So it's not safe, don't do that. But so that forcing the yield also is not good data. And so we need to do this in a really controlled manner. So we do what's called stage crossings. So my team goes out. We have a very strict protocol on how we cross the street. We have one person coding, one person crossing, and we try to look like a normal person and just sort of like walking around. And then when the car is just right at the right spot, then we plant ourselves stepping into the road, looking right at them, making it very clear that we want to cross. Now in real life, I would cross like this, but we don't do that in this study. No arm up, just step into the road we want to cross. And we do this at unsignalized marked crosswalks. Signalized crosswalks are where a lot of fatal crashes happen, but it's very difficult to measure this type of interaction at signalized crossings because so much of the traffic is controlled by the lights. So we do this at signalized unmarked crosswalks. I also don't want anybody to badger me about these marked crosswalks. Any corner is a crosswalk. It does not have to be marked. Please take that into your knowledge bank and use that. Stop for pedestrians at every corner, whether or not it's marked or not. And we pick sites that are at or near fatal crashes, so places in St. Paul at or near where people have been killed. And then we had to sort of move it around to find some of these marked unsignalized crosswalks where there's sufficient throughput on either side for pedestrian enforcement. So you have to have the cops kind of hiding downstream and upstream of these crosswalks. And so then you have your pedestrian going across, which is a plainclothes police officer, and then they start radioing in, you know, black Chevy, whatever, and then they get down to the end of the block, and the cop is standing there waving them forward, and they line them all up, and they ticket them. So that's how it goes. We also need it to be high volume because you want to capture a lot of drivers, and it has to be really visible. So you can't have this be on a sleepy little street, which unfortunately is somewhere, some places, say like by Metro State, where some pedestrians have been killed, but unfortunately that's just not high enough throughput for people to see this. So then we needed to get baseline. So before we started doing any treatment, what's the state of affairs in St. Paul? Now this isn't true baseline because the Stop For Me campaign had already been going for a couple of years, but it was the most baseline that we could get before we started doing our new treatment and new implementation. So these are our sites that we selected. We tried to get as sprawling across the city of St. Paul as we could. Any intersections or these crosswalks in red are enforced sites. And the green ones are generalization sites. So the enforced sites get enforcement and other types of treatment. And our green sites are generalization. So looking for this diffusion of treatment across the city. So do drivers start to change everywhere, not just where they've seen cops and where they've seen extra signage. Okay. Also, this is like really, I didn't realize how big St. Paul is, and I live in it, but man, it's far to get to some of these sites. These are just some of the examples of some of the different types. So we have 2, 3, 4, and 5 lane roadways in this study. And so these are some of the dicier sites, I guess. University in Kent is so-so, but Snelling and Blair, Dale and Jessamine, and Bryce and Magnolia. These 2 are generalization sites. Those 2 are treatment sites, and those are just 4 of the 16 that we selected. Okay, so how do we do this? We always do it in teams of 2. So they go out. These are trained, paid undergrads, some of my full-time research staff, or myself, depending on the site. So some of the sites were just far too dangerous to send out undergrads. So a PhD is just far more expendable. I cross to save the undergrads. And they alternate. So, you know, one of the things that's really hard about this is, like, myself and my team are risking our lives for this data. And I'm not exaggerating, which is why it's sort of painful when people accuse me of faking this data. Like, I'm literally risking my life to give you this data, but cool, call me a liar. But we're not necessarily taking on more risk than we do in our everyday life, right? So we're crossing the street. We're doing it in a very controlled way, right? But the problem with risk is that exposure is a big part of risk. And so in your normal life, you would not cross the street hundreds of thousands of times. And that's what my team is doing. So we go out and we cross the street 20 times, but they alternate. So they do 10 and 10 to cut their risk in half. So no one does the full 20 unless it's me out there, and I'll sometimes do the full 20. We only do it in clear weather conditions. It has to be dry. It doesn't have to be sunny, but it can't be raining. No ice on the ground. We need the friction factor to stay the same for everyone's safety. We do it sort of 9 to 4. Rush hour is a totally different animal, and I think probably when some people say this isn't my experience, they're probably crossing at times a day that my team is not. So then we have all these markings out on the roadway for our coding. And so we have this dilemma zone. So it needs to be fair, right? So we're not just stepping into the road and assuming that a car right there will stop for us. So we use this dilemma zone, which all these are 30-mile-an-hour roadways. On a 0 grade roadway, it's 141 feet. Dilemma zone. Anybody that's outside of that mark, we have markings the road on the curbs, they're fair game. They should stop for us. If they're inside that mark, they don't have to stop for us. Sometimes they do, because it's actually still fairly generous distance, and people on the inside will sometimes still stop for us. But if they don't, we don't count them as non-yielding. But if they do, we count them as yielding. And then we're marking the yielding distances. So we want to know, are they yielding close to the crosswalk or further back? Because especially on multi-lane roads, the closer you stop to the crosswalk, the more at risk you're putting the pedestrian. So we need to get people pushed back. So we have marks. So we're marking, did they stop 10 feet or less, 10 to 40 feet from the crosswalk, or 40 feet back. And 40 feet back is where we want everyone to be. Since you're all engineers, I figured you would love to see a equation. Here's one. And so this is our dilemma zone. We use the ITE signal timing formula. So this is for yellow light, right? So when you have a yellow light, depending on your distance, if you're beyond a zone, then you better stop, because it's going to turn red before you get through the intersection. But if you're so close, you're going to make it through. And so that's what we use. We use a 0 or 1 second response time, which people criticize me about, but I assure you, this is more than enough time for people to stop for us. And if they don't have time to stop, they're going too fast. And breaking one law doesn't absolve you of breaking another law. Okay, so a little bit, this is how we do it. So, we place 1 foot in the crosswalk. If the vehicle does not yield, we just stay put, right? If they begin yielding or they have to be clearly yielding. We don't wait for a full stop because a lot of drivers won't stop. Even though the law is stop, they'll do this roll. If they're doing the roll too close, then we stay put. But most of the time, they're doing it pretty far back, and we proceed out. Then we sort of check the next lane line. So this is the way that you can make yourself safe. Crossing intersection, this classic look left, look right, look left again, and go is bad advice. We shouldn't tell our kids that. We should tell them to treat every lane like a brand new road that they're stepping into the very first time. So is this lane clear? Yep. Get into it. Is that lane clear? Yep. Get into it. And so on. Because by the time you get to the 5th lane at Snelling and Blair, everything has changed from the first time you checked. Right? So proceed on, stop, proceed on, stop. If we get to the median, then we kind of treat that next. If there is a pedestrian refuge, we treat the next road like the first one, like we're on the curb for the first time. If there's a center line, we'll stop on the center line. Sometimes you get a trap, which is, cars flowing all around you, which is terrifying, but thankfully doesn't happen often. And if a large gap appears, we just go, right? So we don't hang out, and we try to act as naturally as possible. So if we can get across between a big gap of cars, we go. Okay. So I'm going to see if I can show this. This is a little clunky, but something was happening with this, but I think you can still get the point. This is Snelling and Blair, one of the sites that I don't let undergrads cross. So we would be going like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are all drivers not yielding. We stop yelling at 10, which often happens here. So I think that was a no yield cross. I don't think a single car stopped. And that was early in the study, right? So it does get better. That's not what life is like at that crosswalk today. But early on, that's what it was like. It was pretty dicey, pretty scary. We made the mistake. We took our coders out there to train them. And naively, we were like, oh, we'll train them to code and cross at Snelling and Blair. They can do it there. They can do it anywhere. That was a bad idea. And at the end, they never crossed there because it was so scary. Come on back here. Okay, this is what our coding sheet looks like. So, we have each crossing. We're just tallying cars not yielding. Once they yield, we tally where they're yielding. This is a big thing that we're looking for here, these passes, right? This is the thing that's going to kill us as the passing vehicle. So one car stops in one lane of travel, and in the next lane of travel in the same direction, a car comes flying through at full speed. Many roadways in St. Paul that are 2 lanes, you better bet this is still happening on the right. So cars fly around on the right at full speed, assuming that the car is turning, and it doesn't dawn on them for a moment that there's another reason for that car to be stopped. So we're looking for that, and that's definitely what kills people. We code hard brakes if their nose tips down dramatically or we hear a tire squeal. We code that. If we have to jump out of the way, the car has to swerve. Almost never happens because we're doing this in a very controlled manner. If we get trapped, so you proceed out, you somehow get onto that center line, and now cars are going all around you. That's a trap. There's a couple sites that happens. Most sites do not. And then failure protocol. So if we accidentally force the yield or something happens, so this is for our safety and retraining. If a natural pedestrian comes along, we do code them. At some sites, it happens more often than not. Sometimes a natural pedestrian comes along, but then they cross at that crosswalk. I'm like, my marks are not for that crosswalk. And so we just have to eyeball it, and we do the best we can because we do want to know what life is like for natural pedestrians. So we code that. And if it's a really good cross, then we do one less cross on our side. So anytime we can reduce our exposure, we do because, again, this is really dangerous and we can be killed. So we did this last fall, so in 2017, and at that time we did about 1,500 crossings per session. So if we go out there, we do 20 crossings on average, we would see about 67 cars. It would be much lower if everybody's just stopped for us, right? You'd see less cars because you get across and everybody yields. And we were about 32% yielding, so 3 in 10 cars would stop for us. The lowest site, so that was Dale and Jessamine at that time, was 18% yielding. And the very best was Snelling and Fairmount, which is beautiful as a pedestrian refuge, and it was only 49%. So none of these sites were doing very well. So the good news was the stopping was pretty good. So when they did stop, they were stopping pretty far back. We didn't have a lot of close yields, but you know, we want to get more of these into the greater than 40 for the safety of pedestrians on these multi-lane roads, even two-lane roads that are wide enough to pass. I'll even say there are some places like Cretan and Goodrich where it's not really wide enough to pass on the right, and there are drivers that will cross the center line and go in the opposite lane of travel across. That is how impatient drivers are. So we can get passes anywhere, whether there's space or not. But this was the really scary thing that we saw was the multiple threats were out of control. So when Ron came out and was training all of us, he said, normally we have to do cross after cross after cross and go to these different sites to try to see a pass. Like, it's hard for me to even see one so I can demonstrate and show the coders what it was like. And we're like, there's one, there's one, there's one. And so we count these by the percentages per crossing. So it's not per car like the yielding are, but per crossing. So 1 in every 10 crossing, we would get a multiple threat pass. So we're out at a session, we on average are seeing 2 just per session. And these are normally just at full speed. They're not slowing down at all. They just fly on by the car. Not a whole lot of braking. And then thankfully we don't have a lot of these other dangerous measures. So we really said we need to focus on this. And it was a big criticism that I was getting from some engineers locally, was saying, you're going to kill people with what you're trying to do. Because if you increase yielding, you increase the opportunity for passes. Right? If nobody stops for you, nobody can pass that car. But that's not really a community I want to live in, where no one ever stops for pedestrians, because if they stop, we're risking somebody passing them. The focus then needed to be, we need to improve yielding, and we need to really focus on stopping this passing event and talking to people about just how dangerous it is. And the thing is that the fine is the same. So it's set by the statewide payables list. And so it's like $180 or something like that. If you don't yield for pedestrian, you get caught. And if a car has stopped for pedestrian, you fly on past that car, it's the exact same price. But the risk to that pedestrian is not the same. And we need to be really penalizing big time these cars that are flying by, stop cars for pedestrians. So I talked to the city, what can we do? And it's not within the city's purview to change the penalty, but it is within the purview of St. Paul Police Department to change some of their protocols on how they write up these tickets. So what they decided to do was increase the penalty by checking this box on the ticket that's endangering life or public property. And so when you check that box, now that driver can't just pay that fine, they must appear in court. Right? So to me, $181, yes, that's painful, but to have to go to court, far more painful. Right? I don't want to be chastised by a judge. I don't want to have to miss work. That's far more painful to me. Okay, so the other thing was we wanted to focus on some education. So again, this is a little kind of, I don't know what's happening with this. We tried, but so we did this PSA. So the City of St. Paul put this together for us. If you can remember my one line, let me know. It's really good. I practiced. Oh, here, let me see if I can. Oh, no, I'm just going to do this.
Do you see the person crossing the street? Do you see the other car approaching? This is a dangerous combination. If a vehicle ahead of you is stopped at a crosswalk, you should assume someone is crossing the street. St. Paul is stepping up enforcement. Passing another vehicle that is stopped for a pedestrian in the crosswalk now carries a stiffer penalty and requires you to appear in court. Here in St. Paul, we're working hard to build a city that works for all of us. That includes doing everything we can to keep people safe on our streets. If you see a car stopped for a pedestrian, don't pass. If you already stopped your car, great job. Be sure to stop as far back as possible. That way everyone can see them. You guys ready to cross? Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, so do you get it? Yeah. I also put together a bunch of education materials. So this is one side of what was on something that we pushed out to the schools. So we pushed about 17,000 of these out to schools. I drew this myself, so don't criticize the art. But just trying to really convey that sight distance change, if you can stop far back, and how important that is to pedestrian safety, and do some education. We put out this thing to try to notify people this is coming, right? We're not looking to ticket people. We're hoping that you're going to stop for pedestrians and you can avoid the ticket. And so we really pushed this out to as many community groups and schools as we could in St. Paul. I also made some infographics to push out to do some education for pedestrians how to cross safely, and to get drivers to really understand just what a problem this is in St. Paul, how many pedestrians are being hit. And in the last 5 years, we've had almost 200 children hit in St. Paul. So, it is a pretty good disarming method when you're talking to people who really want to demonize and say this is pedestrians' fault. They're jumping into traffic, they're stepping in front of cars. But when we're talking about kids, that sort of changes the equation. So what are we going to do to protect our kids? And it's really drivers' responsibility to be looking out for kids. So we had our first wave of enforcement. So we broke over winter. We didn't do any coding over winter. We tried to get out there when spring came. Do you guys remember what spring was like this last year? I know, it didn't come. And I was pulling my hair out because we needed to get out there and collect data. So finally, right at the end of April, the snow melted and we were able to get out there and get just a hair of data before the police started on April 30th. So this was their first wave of enforcement. And so they're out there enforcing half of those sites, all those red sites. And this is just a warning phase. So no one actually got the fine. Nobody actually got penalized financially, but they did get those little flyers to say, hey, we just caught you. It looks slightly different for them. And really try to educate and outreach. And so over 1,000 warnings got issued to drivers. So this was really great, got a lot of attention. We tried to rely on media as much as we can. So I had to do a lot of interviews all throughout this process to try to keep it in the news so people can keep hearing about this project. So this was our result after phase one. So actually how it turned out, the way the breakdown was, I mean, our average was 32%, but the baseline for enforcement sites, they were actually worse. So they were below 30% yielding in baseline. And we started to see during that first wave, so these are 2 weeks of high visibility enforcement, we started to see it coming up. So we did start to get a bump. And then we have the weeks after, and so this is kind of to be expected that it starts to come back down. Police are not out any longer, and drivers start to go back to normal at these sites. So then we had wave two. So this happened in June. And so this was going to be our first ticketing wave. And then we had these feedback signs. So perhaps you've seen these signs out in St. Paul. And so we put these out at major corridors around the city. So there are 8 of these up. And so we picked places where we had really high ADT, really high throughput. So some of these sites have, 30,000 cars go through a day. We're really trying to capture as many drivers' attention as we can with this. So what my team does is we run up our data for our enforcement sites and send it to the city. The city made little placards, and then on Monday, my team runs out and changes all these signs. So we had for last week and the record. So this is known as social norming. If you're familiar with social norming, the idea is, this is what most drivers do, and you should do it too. But you can see the most drivers is not doing the good thing here. We were hoping that we would have broken 50% at this point in the study, and we hadn't. But the good thing about what this is it's not just social norming, it's also implied surveillance. So most social norming is like, you see a billboard and it's like, 60% of college students don't binge drink. Well, then people go, I don't believe that, and it's just one study, and I don't know where they got that, but that's probably some survey where college kids lied or whatever. This is a little different because you're going, how are they getting these numbers? They clearly get it on an ongoing basis because it's every week. And so it has this implied surveillance that somebody's watching me, and it works in a slightly different way than just pure social norming. So this is kind of where we put these signs at major corridors around the city to try to capture drivers' attention. And so, this is where we were with wave 2. So the feedback signs went in, and we had that first wave. Clearly, we didn't get a lot of response from drivers in that first wave. So that was sort of a bummer. What was interesting was these feedback signs went up, but the press just really didn't take much notice of what we were doing. And it sort of was strange, but then all of a sudden, in the weeks following that enforcement, because we really like to pair this, like a new thing went in and police are out and really get the press talking, and they just didn't. But the weeks following, all of a sudden, the press glommed onto this. Like, and this is how it works. One news agency covers it, and then everybody else wants to cover it, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. And then we all of a sudden, the numbers started coming up. And that really shows the power of these signs, that the numbers really started to improve at these enforcement sites. So the third wave, again, this is ticketing wave, and we started doing some engineering treatment now. So the signs are still up, the feedback signs are still up, and we use simple R1-6 signs just on the center line at these sites. And it's really, this is really pretty effective and low-cost treatment. So that's really what we were looking for. Of course, RFBs are pretty effective, but they're also like 40 grand. So, these are a lower-cost treatment option, not as much cost to put these in, but they are vulnerable. They do get hit. I like to say that that's a pretty nice metaphor for the safety of pedestrians, because people send me nasty emails or like, these pedestrians are wearing black and they're just running out into the road, blah, blah. Well, this thing's pretty bright, it's middle of the road, and they still get hit. Okay, so the entry signs went in, and then the wave of enforcement is going, and man, that's when we really started seeing the numbers starting to rise at our treatment sites. Now, it's true, you can see our generalization sites at this point really aren't moving much. So we're seeing improvement at places that are getting this intensive treatment, but we're not quite seeing the system-wide change yet. But then following that St. Paul wave and the weeks following, we started seeing this trend that these generalization starts were starting to come up. And I was trying to not get too excited, but it was like, ooh, maybe something is happening. So at this point, these numbers are starting to climb. And it's funny because Twitter is like the best and worst place in the world. But like early on when we were in the 40s, people would be like, I can't believe they are putting up these numbers. Like, I can't believe these are the numbers. And then these numbers started going up and they're like, I can't believe these are the numbers. I'm like, I don't know. They are the numbers. They're the numbers. But it is true. I mean, it's hard and it's part of the program, but these signs are there for a reason, and they're not there necessarily to have a perfect temperature gauge for the whole city, but it's to try to push people to change, right? So that's the power of these feedback signs, is saying a lot of people are stopping for pedestrians and you should too, and if you do that long enough, it'll take hold in the community and change the culture. And then we had our fourth and final wave of enforcement in October. So we did, at this point, gateway treatments. So this is taking those R1-6 signs. This is a picture of when we were testing it out. If you're going to look at these things, it's really great to take these signs out on those little rubber footings and just kind of play around with them. And you can see what happens to yielding. And so we kind of play with the distance and placement to figure out what really worked. So this is Marion and Charles. It's one of my favorite sites to cross. It's just really nice. Got a nice pedestrian refuge. And once these went in, man, the numbers, we were like high 70s at this site, which before was, 40s. And so it creates this gate that drivers have to go through, and they feel a little constrained to go through it, makes them slow down. And it's just a really effective treatment. It is experimental, so you can't just throw it out. You have to get Federal Highways permission to do this. So this is where we were. We had this gateway go in, and then it just continued to rise. And so now we are post St. Paul PD wave. So I think we've had now 1 week of data collection after that St. Paul PD wave ended. And you can see that generalization sites are just continuing to climb and come up. So this last week, here's one of my favorite signs, like very simple. Last week, I think we were at 73%. So that's, I think, what's going up on the signs for this week. But our top was 77. So in the second week of the last wave of enforcement, we hit 77% yielding at our treatment sites. Just incredible. And for the community to see it, they're skeptical, but for my team, we're like, oh my gosh, like some of these sites were so scary to get across, and it's just a dream to walk across them. Now we can just get through so easily. So some of our other data are passing and multiple threats. They fell from 11% of all crossings at all the sites down to about 3% per week. So we saw this really nice decline. Our stopping distances look really good as well. So we have less than 10% of cars are stopping less than 10 feet back. And we have more than 50% are 40 plus feet back. So often we're at like 60% or so of the cars that do stop for us are 60 plus feet back. We have about 5 or 6% at less than 10, and then the rest are in the middle. One really interesting thing we see is with bus stops. So some of the early data, we haven't run it on the latest data, like on the bigger bulk, but we did find that yielding is significantly lower at crosswalks that are near bus stops. And my hypothesis is similar to what you see in this picture. So what do you see here? The bus stop is in the crosswalk, right? So, and I drive through this a lot. I live in Highland Park, and you get burned often. Like you want to stop for pedestrians, and you stop, and then they're like not looking at you. You're like, oh, they're waiting for the bus, and on you go, right? And this is like one of the most egregious ones, where the platform to get on the bus is in the crosswalk. So that's where pedestrians are waiting, is in the bus stop. I don't think I heard anybody from Metro Transit, but make change. You're killing people. This is a big problem. Drivers are ignoring pedestrians because they think they're waiting for the bus. And even worse, we saw that pedestrians at the bus stop, you go, well, we're doing something different. We're stepping in. We're trying to make it look like we're crossing. If you put a bus stop near a crosswalk, these pedestrians or the bus patrons are waiting for the bus, and they start to get impatient. And so what do? They step down and they start looking down the road going like this, and they look exactly like we do. Exactly. We've got to get these bus stops away from crosswalks. We've got to get them to far side, right? So you put a bus stop near side on the crosswalk or on the intersection, then they're going to sync right up to a crosswalk. But if you put bus stops far side, and this shouldn't be a hard sell because there's lots of other data say this improves efficiency and throughput for buses. The bus stop to the far side, then you're going to have people loading away from the crosswalk. So as you can tell, this is like, drives me crazy. But this is really cool. Look at this. Woo! This is our yielding over time. So we've got the blue is all crosswalks. So we don't have zero passing at these 2-lane roadways. But when I just go 3-lane and greater, it's pretty well mirrored, and you can see it just comes down, 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 down. So this was really amazing because criticism was, as we increase yielding, we weren't going to increase passing, and we didn't. We decreased passing and we improved yielding dramatically. So you would think with all the yielding that we have, people would be just passing left and right, and that is not what happened. So all this focused intervention education that we did was really powerful. So takeaway. This was really hard work, more than I ever would have imagined. I'm really grateful for the project and for Minnesota DOT funding this. But my team has crossed these crosswalks at nearly 12,000 times. By the end of the day, we're going to hit 12,000 crossings. So just a tremendous amount of work and labor that goes into collecting this data at great risk to our own personal safety. But it's work that we have to do because too many people are being killed and hit in St. Paul. Also, it takes just a lot of coordination. There are so many balls in the air to keep this study going. So to keep track of where the police are going to be and where their schedule is and the schedule of our coders to make sure we're not there at the same time and get the numbers up on the signs and get everything to St. Paul Public Works. And there's just like an incredible amount of time and energy. So if the city wants to take this on, even not do all the measurement, you really need a dedicated person that's focused on just managing all these things coming together in an integrated way. But it definitely shows that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that you would not be able to change the driver behavior by doing any one of these things individually. And even sort of doing them at different times probably wouldn't get the same result either. You really have to have them coordinating and pushing all together. So this really gets in front of people that it's a problem. People are being hit, our kids are being hit, and you're going to get caught if you don't get your behavior in order. But St. Paul is not an island, so we really need people to do this in their city. And this was one of the really big problems when we were taking this on and kind of questioning, can we do this? Is because St. Paul is not an island. And a lot of the people that hit and kill pedestrians in St. Paul are not St. Paul residents. They're people that live elsewhere. So we're not just trying to push this message to about 300,000 people. We're trying to push this message to 3 million people, right? And change the whole metro, change the whole state, change the whole country. So we really need more cities taking on things like this to really push this initiative forward. So we're not just focused on St. Paul. Everywhere is safe because all drivers are really mindful of pedestrians. All right, and that's it. So I'll take some questions. Yeah.
It's more a comment because you're pushing upstream on this, right? Right now, our friends in Texas A&M have got everybody convinced at intersections like this, the solution is a hawk signal or something like that, which are expensive. You got to maintain them. They're ugly. Visual pollution. I hate that. But there's like three things that I think that you guys, as you further your study, need to address to try and convince the skeptics that you can have unsignalized crossings without signals. One thing I didn't see was a segregation by the pavement markings. Some of them were the zebras, some of them were the bars. Mm-hmm. Does that make a difference? Yes or no? If it does, okay, we'll go to that to eliminate the need for the hawks. And the second one is I don't know if you guys did a Monte Carlo gap analysis of these crosswalks to ensure that they're actually safe for pedestrians to cross without a signal. And I think, I agree with you. We need to project this not just to Minnesota, but to the country. If we can do this, we've got a real pedestrian safety issue. Hawk signals are not the answer. I don't know your opinion of them. I hate the things. They're just obnoxious. They're expensive, but I think that might help your argument here. Mm-hmm. That if you did that kind of a Monte Carlo gap analysis, like these are inherently safe crossings anyway. Because if you remember, ITE has been pushing that you don't want to put unprotected crossings on any multi-lane road if it's got more than 2 lanes. No, you got to put a signal up, which I don't agree with that. Because I think if you do the Monte Carlo, you can say, hey, there's certain thresholds, pavement width, pedestrian volume, and traffic volume, that are perfectly safe. And so maybe if we could bolster that, mm-hmm. I think that would go a long way to helping get rid of that concept that we have to signalize everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, one of the things is, of course, some of those treatments are effective, but not always, right? I hear people tell me they've got an RFB in their community and still no one stops for them. So, in this idea that we should try to concentrate pedestrian traffic, which is really what's being done in St. Paul in a lot of areas, which is, we're going to pull crosswalks, we're going to pull markings because Charlie Ziegler says it's safer that way. I don't buy it, and I don't buy that pedestrians are going to walk 1 or 2 blocks out of their way to get across the street and walk 1 or 2 blocks back. And you know, it's pretty unfair to our most vulnerable pedestrians, which our pedestrians are disproportionately, you know, elderly, people of color, homeless, or young people. And so we need to do everything we can as a society to help people get across the street in the most efficient way possible. You know, it's cold, we're in our nice warm car, we can just stop and sit pleasantly in the heat. But in a Minnesota winter, it is not fair to say, walk a half mile this way to the next signalized intersection to get across the street. Dale and Jessamine is that way. You have to walk over a mile out of your way if you want to get across the intersection or get across the crosswalk that we were crossing. Is that far uphill in both directions? Ruh-roh. Uphill in both directions to get across that signalized crossing. So yeah, I mean, we can do this cheaper and we can do it system wide, and I think we've shown that. But yeah, we do have the numbers, and we're running regressions, you know, versus continental versus enhanced to show how much power does that have. Speed and ADT are big, bus stops are big, so those are some of the things that help the numbers. Yeah.
John Maxwell spent 33 years in St. Paul. Actually, I was the chair of the first pedestrian committee of NCITE when it formed. But one of the things that I would say is that, I mean, engineering is important, because you can tell with the passing on the right, things like that. I'm not a big fan of right turn lanes. I'm also not a big fan of marked crosswalks, because the fact of the matter is crosswalks that are marked were put in to control pedestrians where you want them to cross. In the state of Minnesota, you can cross at any cross intersection, marked or unmarked. What we haven't done, and why I'm a huge supporter of the Stop For Me campaign, and I think there needs to be more on the education side to get out to the media, to get it out, is that one of the things that Sergeant Ellison, who's the police officer or commander that's in charge of this, we were sitting for coffee one day, and the number one complaint when we started the thing was when they'd ask the drivers, why didn't you stop? Because they didn't see it. They didn't see the pedestrian. You know, how can you not see a pedestrian? There used to be big groups to begin with. And then I went to police officers in fluorescent green vests. How can you not see this person? Went home and I thought about it, and it came down to human factors. Jeremy and I had coffee again. The fact of the matter was, I believe those drivers, they didn't see him. The reason they didn't see him is they weren't looking for him in the first place. If you're busy doing other things, or changing the radio station, or saying, oh, that car just stopped, without understanding why that car stopped or why that truck stopped, and put that up, drivers are not driving defensively. They're not doing it, and there's been no onus or responsibility placed on drivers. You get behind that 3,000-pound vehicle, you have an obligation to drive and operate. And so this enforcement is an actual way of providing a tuition statement to the driver, an education, and what they have to look for. And everything has gone to Hawks or the engineering thing or whatever. Until we change driver behavior and put enforcement on that and educate them. And pedestrians, you know,
Sure.
We just got to program wave, walk. Because there's no way to communicate. But if you wave to a driver, you wait until you see that you got their attention and they cross that lane, now you got communication. Those are the things that we need to do. I think this can help in doing that. We've been putting out centerline pin signs in St. Paul for 15 years. We rotate them every 3 weeks because they become complacent, drivers become complacent if they haven't been out there. So we just move them. We spend a lot of money a year just rotating those to do it. But the Stop For Me with enforcement and education is a powerful tool. And it is something that I would like to see go statewide, for sure, in the metro.
Yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting host of reasons why people don't stop me. Obviously, I'm not in their mind, but there are some people that's clear they don't see me. They're hyper focused on the car in front of them, or looking at their phone or whatever. And sometimes they do this like, and I'm like, oh, whatever. They see me too late. Sometimes, man, they look right at me, and it is like, that's the worst part. Is they look right at me and they just are like, sorry, my input is more important than yours. The really weird one and the scary one to me is people will look at you and they will slow down significantly to the point that you're certain they're going to stop. And then they just don't. And we're going like, what the hell? Like, they're looking at me, they slow down to like 5 miles an hour, but they go on through, and we finally figured out what we think they're doing. They're prepared to stop if I make them stop. Right? So they're prepared. They're going, I will stop for you if you step out in front of me because I don't want to hit you, but I also don't really want to stop for you. So if you stay put, I'm going. And that's what a lot of drivers do. So, when we talk about educating pedestrians, but it's this two-way road. Pedestrians do what they do for a host of reasons. That's really complex. But I think a lot of drivers are meaning pedestrians. If you want somebody to stop for you, you better step out in front of them, which is dangerous game.
So I got a real quick question. By the way, this is early research that you're doing and got some results out of it. I have a whole page of notes and questions I want to ask you afterwards. But my question is, does St. Paul PD plan to continue periodic enforcement in the future?
Yeah.
Or is this sort of a one-off thing and they're going to put resources elsewhere in the future?
I think they're going to continue it. The hard part about this is that, it requires a lot of officers and overtime. So they get a grant from the through to do this, but I think Jeremy gets some to do it at this extreme, level. But I think he does have some resources internally to continue this. And they were enforcing other sites outside of our study periodically. So they had communities saying this site is a problem, and so there were a few other sites that they were enforcing, and they'll continue that.
This was the 5th year of the program.
Right.
They've been doing
Yeah.
this, so.
Yeah.
A lot of questions.
So I'm curious of your view. Seems like the data was collected in this 9 to 4 time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how that lines up with the fatalities. Is the fatalities in the 6 to 8 to 9 time frame? Is the fatalities in the 4 to 6 p.m. time frame? And what shifts? How does the data skew when you're in this non-peak performing, data collection?
Right.
How does the pedestrian's view shift when all of a sudden, or vice versa, how does the driver's view shift when all of a sudden you get a 6 to 9 or a 4 to 7? And, you can extrapolate and you get this kind of great performance in these non-peak areas, but what happens when there's now 10 more seconds of dilemma or 12 more seconds of dilemma or a lot more decisions having to be made in these other 3 hours? And if that's where that lines up with more of the fatalities.
Right.
Now I understand that's exposure and risk increase and those kinds of things, but I'm curious if your view on whether the data would change or how you can even extrapolate to that to see whether you gain performance or as good a performance in those 3 early, 3 late, as opposed to the time in between.
Yeah. I mean, I feel really confident that our numbers are poorer in those hours. But I imagine that we have made gains in blocks of time. So the culture is changing in St. Paul. We're seeing that at all these sites that are not receiving treatment, which tells me that we're going to change all hours of the day. But once ADT gets very high and you get a pack of cars, if the first car doesn't stop in that pack, the likelihood that anybody else in that pack is really low. So we're always jumping out in front of the pack. We don't jump in the pack. And that's going to change the numbers. And so sometimes there's really few breaks in the pack because you've got ADT is so high. So it's a challenge for sure. And so this data only extends so far to these controlled conditions, but I feel confident to say we're making change across the whole system all hours of the day. But that's because, visibility is a problem, and so this is complicated for sure. Yeah.
Have you, this is a curiosity here,
did you find, or did you look at whether there's any difference between male, female, large, small, kids, adults, wheelchairs, or crutches?
Yeah. So, we had a diverse group of pedestrians, males and females, and a decently diverse group of races of pedestrians in my team. We weren't controlling for that. We weren't looking for that. Wasn't the focus of the study. And we really just tried to rotate people around and hope it all came out in the wash. But there's been some other research to show the race of pedestrian does impact the likelihood the driver will yield. The gender of the driver will change, and there's been some studies about, like high-end vehicles are less likely to yield. I'm not sure I've totally seen that in this study. That study was done in Berkeley, and I'm not really sure about that. But no doubt it's a factor. I get feedback about the height of our pedestrians, and if I could have done it, I would have just cloned myself and sent myself across the whole city, because I want control. I want that to be the thing that's changing behavior, but no doubt it does change behavior. And so we just try to keep it as controlled as possible and hope that we weren't impacting our data too much. But once we start going down this rabbit hole too much of a tall pedestrian versus a young pedestrian, I mean, what do I do with that data? Like, go out and tell the shorties in St. Paul, tough luck, wear heels. Like, I don't know what to do with it, but no doubt it's a factor. And there's just all these little subtle things about, confidence, and, do you really want to get across? You look a little meager, and it's very hard to get very controlled, which is why I just wish I could have done all of these crossings myself. Yeah.
So I'm not a sign person, but you commented that the R1 that you need to have HWA approval, so that's
to do the gateway treatment.
So an interim approval right now through your TCP? And typically where I'm going is, and I just don't have it back, usually did that when we have a blanket. So they get approval, and then just agencies have to let them that over. So it's a question, I don't know, and that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the sign itself, it's the gateway configuration.
Okay.
So putting it in the on the shoulder.
Okay.
If you put it on the curb on the median, then that's fine. But if you put it on the curb on the outside, and you put multiple of these, that configuration is an experimental configuration, and you do have to get approval case by case.
Is it case by case, or do you guys know if MnDOT has it?
MnDOT does not have it.
Okay.
The RTE process.
Okay.
It's experiment.
Right.
Be included in the next edition.
So yeah, I mean, you can use engineering judgment. There's no sign costs that'll come out and get you. But if you want to influence FHWA to change their policies, then you want to get this permission to experiment, so you can give them the data to make it.
Right. My question just was last time.
Right. Yeah. MnDOT did the application for us, but they didn't have it already, and so yeah. I don't know.
I think we'll do one more question and then.
Sure.
Are you planning to continue analysis now, less as continue in a less focused rate on media or other messages, like the lasting impacts over time? Just talk through kind of the last stages of your study, time frame and reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're collecting data to the end of this month, assuming winter doesn't get us before then, and then we're done. That task of data collection is ended. We're in data analysis phase, and then we write the report. And it'll be published in April, I think, is when the final publication goes. So we're going to try to sneak out there. If spring hits, we're going to try to sneak out there and get a little bit more data next year to see what happened, at least within the parameters of my contract. Then my ability to collect data beyond that is limited on somebody funding me. So if you know somebody. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely important for this to continue. I've been training some sort of cadets with St. Paul PD on how to do these crossings and how to do the coding. And I think Commander Ellison is going to try to continue some of that on his end to continue tracking their progress as we go. But certainly you better bet in a couple of years I'm going to be banging on somebody's door to say, give me some funding so we can go out there and see, did we have that sustained performance like we saw in Gainesville, Florida. And, you know, it seems like, and Ron feels pretty confident, that there's just a tipping point. That once you get performance so high, it just tips and the community just changes and the culture just changes. And I think we've hit that, but only time and more data will tell.
Cool. Well, why don't we thank Nichole one more time? And here's a token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. This is
Highly
better
coveted.
than
This is highly
the
coveted.
beer glass I got
Oh, I
last
don't
time.
know.
That I was
That's all up to your opinion.
respect it,
Well, that's a little bit different.
so
So thanks again,
right,
Nichole, for
yeah.
showing up. And remember, everybody, the vote is out, so do your voting. Thank you. I appreciate you for coming. Thanks, everybody.